Asu, for having me, and thank you to all of you. This is actually my first meeting with Arizona Faith Network, so I'm really glad to be here. I've been longing for a chance to be involved in these kinds of things, so I'm really grateful to be here. My name is Rabbi Emily Langowitz. My pronouns are she and her, and I am from the East Coast, originally from Massachusetts, and I was ordained as a rabbi from the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in New York City, which is the Reform Movement's rabbinical seminary. So just like there are different denominations of Christianity, same thing is true for Judaism. And we can talk about that a little later if you have questions. And I came out here to Arizona 5 years ago. I was first an assistant rabbi at Temple Solel in Paradise Valley. And more recently, I work for the Union for Reform Judaism, which is kind of the overarching institutional body that supports Reform congregations across the US and Canada. And I work in the adult Jewish learning department. So what I'll say is, as a caveat to this hour we have together, is we teach Introduction to Judaism classes, and they are 21 weeks long and an hour and a half each week. So we're going to distill a lot of information. That alone doesn't cover everything there is to know about Judaism. We're going to distill a lot, I think, in one evening. This is just us like looking at the tip of the iceberg, and I'll do my best to kind of give us a general overview. And then, of course, I feel like the most productive piece will be able to ask questions of each other. I'll start with sort of a broader overview, and then I'll talk a little bit about Shavuot, the holiday that's coming up. And then I'll be happy to hear from my other co-presenters, and then if there's questions, we'll ask them. So Judaism is a monotheistic religion. And when I usually talk about kind of the pillars of Judaism, people will talk about three things often. They'll talk about God and all of what God is and might mean. So I'll talk about that. They talk about Torah, and I'll explain what I mean when I say Torah. And they talk about Israel, and I'll explain what I mean when I say that, not just the country, but a much broader idea. So God, Torah, and Israel are kind of central to the Jewish faith. And I'm saying the Jewish faith here, but it's important to recognize that Judaism, when people try to define what is Judaism, it's a little complicated, right? It's a faith, but I'm sure you know plenty of Jews who are totally agnostic and never go to any synagogue or faith, communities. And so, yes, it's a religion, but it's also maybe an ethnicity, but there are Jews of all different ethnicities. So is it a race? Well, it's not really a race, because you can convert into Judaism. And so it's kind of confusing to put your finger on what exactly is Judaism. So it's kind of all of the above, right? It's all of those things, and Judaism encompasses a lot. It's faith and tradition and community and all of those things. So when we think about, let's break down the pillars, those three pillars. God, as I said, Judaism is a monotheistic religion. One of the central tenets is belief in one God. And of course, there are many Jews who don't believe in God. That gets us back to where we were at the beginning. But generally, there's an understanding of belief in one God. And there is not particular sort of prescribed understanding of what that belief might look like. So people picture all sorts of different things, and there's not really any tenets about what you have to believe about God, other than the belief in God, the belief in one God. So for a lot of people, that looks more personified. For a lot of people, it looks more like a force in the world, or a force within people. You could ask 10 different Jews and probably get 10 different opinions, or 12 different opinions about what God is, right? What we mean when we say God. But that is a central piece. When we talk about Torah, pillar number 2. So the Torah, if you've ever seen one, is a literal physical scroll that Jewish communities will have in their sanctuaries. And on it are written in Hebrew on parchment the words of the 5 books of Moses, or Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, those 5 books. So when we say Torah, we mean, of course, the Torah scroll, but we also mean something much bigger than that. The word Torah comes in Hebrew from the word for instruction or teaching. And so it's also about the whole world of Jewish ideas and texts that flows from that original document. So you may have heard of Jewish people as the people of the book, right? That's very true. There's Torah, and then on top of Torah, there's layers and layers and layers and layers of discussion about what all of that means, from when the Torah was first written down all the way until today. And of course, again, different Jews, different opinions. So different Jews will believe different things about the provenance of the Torah and the texts afterwards. Some believe that it was given to the Jewish people by God at Mount Sinai after their exodus from Egypt. That's the Passover story, the exodus from Egypt. And some people believe it was divinely inspired, but written down by human hands. So it all kind of depends on sort of where you are, but all of those beliefs fall within Judaism. And learning is a really essential component of Jewish practice. So you'll often see people who study Torah throughout the year or study other texts. Maybe you've heard things like Talmud is a big legal text. And something important to recognize is that the Torah describes Judaism in its infancy, right? This is the origin story of who we are and where we come from. And it describes a Judaism rooted in sacrificial cult. It was a sacrificial religion. On the different holidays, you brought different animals, and eventually there would be a temple, and that's where you would bring the sacrifices. And because of the way Jewish history worked out, when the temple was destroyed, not once, but twice, Judaism kind of reinvented itself into what we know today and had to figure out who are we going to be in a world where we no longer have this primary mode of religious practice. And thus arose something we call Rabbinic Judaism, which is what we're the inheritors of today. And this meant no longer were we going to bring an animal to sacrifice, but we're going to pray in a sanctuary. And we're going to read the texts and reread them and think about them. And those things were already happening, but it really pushed us into that space of learning, of study. That's Torah in a nutshell. we can talk more about all of this. And then the idea of Israel. Judaism is very much about peoplehood. So when I traveled once to Istanbul, I showed up at a synagogue. It was Hanukkah. You'll see my little menorah. That's the wrong holiday, but this is what I had as a background. It was Hanukkah, and I showed up at the synagogue in Istanbul and knocked on the door and said, "Can I come in and celebrate Hanukkah with you?" "Oh, sure, come on in. We'd love to have you," right? So when we say Israel, we don't just mean the country or the land, which are very central and important to sort of Jewish understanding. Again, many Jews have many different opinions about what all of that means, but we also mean the people Israel, who we are as a people and what our connection is to one another and what our purpose is in the world. And the sort of primary Jewish understanding of purpose in the world is to be a light unto the nations. So what does that mean? It means, doing good for others. It means, learning and striving to help others. It means modeling moral behavior, all of those different things. And a lot of where those ideas come from, they come from Judaism's central sort of commandments, tenets, which we call mitzvot. Maybe you've heard the word mitzvah. Mitzvot is the plural. And it literally means commandment, but I like the term sacred obligation, because for some people, again, their God concept is not a commanding God concept. And those are all sorts of different things. The Jewish tradition defines that there's 613 of them, and they're all written in the Torah. And some of them are things like how to celebrate different holidays, or how to keep kosher practice, or all of those different things. And some of them are more ethical commands, like do not put a stumbling block before the blind, or to care for people who are sick, or to comfort people who are bereaved, or to bring joy to people when they meet their life partner and join in marriage. So all of those different things, or to not stand idly by your neighbor's blood, right? All of those things come from Torah or interpretation of Torah, and are seen not just as, suggestions, but as things that one ought to do, sacred obligations. So that connects us kind of back to God as well. How do we act in the world? Well, that's guided by a sense of a larger moral essence or purpose. And again, I'm being very vague in my language because depending on which Jewish person you ask, they'll have all sorts of their own ideas about all of these different topics. So I think another thing that influences how Jews in the world today behave in terms of you'll notice that a lot of Jews will be very active in justice or active in good works. And some of that comes from our religious tenets, but some of it also comes from our history and our understanding of what we've been through in the world. And therefore, it says in Torah, the most frequently repeated phrase around why we should, a commandment is remember the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt, right? So that's very central to Jewish understanding, that there's this empathy of, we know what it's like to go through difficult things, both from our sacred text, but also from our history. And that influences the way we choose to show up in the world. So that's the three pillars of Judaism in a nutshell. I don't want to take too much time because I want others to be able to speak, but I'll speak very briefly about Shavuot. So there are a number of Jewish holidays throughout the year. And I think, Margaret, you were mentioning you have a calendar of all of them, and you probably noticed there's a lot of them. There's a lot of holidays. They're all lovely, I think. And they're dabbled throughout the calendar. The Jewish calendar is a luni-solar calendar. So it's guided by the lunar calendar, the months, like, for example, in Islam. But unlike in Islam, we have a solar component, meaning we stay mostly aligned with the solar calendar, because most Jewish holidays are based on, in their very origin, agrarian moments. And so we don't want to get too far off, because then suddenly you're celebrating the harvest holiday at a time where you can't harvest anything, right? So I'm going to get the math wrong because I always get these numbers backwards. It's either 9 out of 17 or 7 out of 19 years, there is a leap year in the Jewish calendar, and you add a whole month just to correct, just to make sure you're not getting off. So all of the holidays have Jewish dates, and that determines where they show up on the Gregorian calendar. And that's why you'll see that they move around. This past year, I think Hanukkah was a little early, quite early in December. And this coming year, it will be right around Christmas. So that's why the holidays you'll see move along the Gregorian calendar, but they're always the same date in the Jewish calendar. So there's many holidays. There are 3 holidays called the festival holidays. These were times where, way back when, you would have brought special sacrifices. You would have made pilgrimage to the temple in Jerusalem. And those holidays are the holiday of Sukkot, which takes place in the fall. And maybe you've seen, that's the one where you build a hut and sit in it. Passover, which takes place in the spring. Which I imagine you might know about. That's probably the most famous one to know about. And then the third one is Shavuot, which is coming up. And the holiday of Shavuot, like many holidays, had an original agrarian meaning and then developed all these layers of meaning. So we learn about Shavuot that it's 7 weeks from the second day of Passover. And you count those. So right now we're actually in that period of counting that Jews call the Omer. An Omer was a sheaf of wheat, and you would sort of be harvesting it every day, and you'd be counting. So that's 49 days. And on the 50th day was Shavuot. So the 50th day after Passover was Shavuot. And that was the point where you were meant to bring the first fruits of your harvest. That's why I said some people were talking about what should we choose as an appropriate background. And I said fruits. And not a lot of American congregations always pick up on that meaning of the first fruits, but in Israel, that's still a really central meaning to how they celebrate the holiday. So a lot of farming communities will bring their baskets of fruits and everyone will dress in white and put flowers everywhere, and they have performances and they bring their first fruits. But it developed other meanings. Part of the meaning was this is also the holiday that celebrates revelation. So if Passover is redemption, leaving Egypt, traveling through the wilderness, Shavuot takes us to revelation. And that's why I said we could also put a mountain as our background, because revelation in Jewish tradition takes place at Mount Sinai. So within the historical understanding or the mythic understanding, Shavuot is the celebration of revelation. And that means we read the 10 Commandments on Shavuot. It means we seek to study on Shavuot. And in the 16th century, the mystics decided that we would use Shavuot as an all-night study session. You would stay up all night studying until the morning prayers. And so you'll see many people, including the Jewish community here in Phoenix, will be having what is called a Tikkun Leil Shavuot, which means a all-night study session for the night of Shavuot. And I think we're doing from 8 to midnight because there's no reason to, we're not quite stretching all the way into 5 in the morning, but some communities will, they'll stay up all night. And by the way, my mysticism professor in rabbinical school used to like to remind us that the 16th century mystics who were living in the land of Israel, which was at the time under the control of Ottoman Turkey, was right around the time when coffee got introduced to the Ottoman Empire. So she always used to say that's why they were willing to stay up all night, because suddenly they had coffee to drink. So many communities will celebrate Shavuot by staying up, or at least having evening classes and learning, and people will gather together. And another reason that I said we could use cheesecake as our background is because Shavuot has become over the years associated as a dairy holiday. The Jewish laws of kashrut, of kosher, keeping kosher, one of the pieces is to separate meat and dairy. So for a lot of holidays, you have meat because that felt special, and I'm a vegetarian, so it doesn't matter for me, but you know, you'd have chicken on Shabbat, you'd have brisket on the holidays, right? You sort of develop all these different meals around meat because it was special, something to make the holiday feel fancy. But on Shavuot, we associate Shavuot with a dairy holiday. So a lot of places will serve cheesecake or blintzes or different dairy foods to keep you up through the night. And we also read the book of Ruth on Shavuot. So that's another piece of the liturgical calendar. So I know that is just scratching the surface of everything, and I'm sure there are probably a lot of lingering questions, but I'm going to pause here so that others can speak, and then if there are questions afterwards, I'm happy to answer them. And I will at the end, I'll say, I mean, I'll share in the chat my contact information. If anyone is curious about joining a Jewish community for the holiday, you're welcome to come with me, or know that I'll be somewhere, either for this coming holiday or even just a Friday night if you want to see a service or something like that. I'm happy to, you know, meet people and shepherd them through the experience. So I can say more about that at the end, and I'll find the details for our Shavuot celebration in Phoenix, but I'll let others speak while I look that up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Emily. So beautiful presentation. Now we will hear from Eddie Chavez, the experience and the work that he's doing.
Definitely. Wow, Rabbi, you were able to sum up so much in such a little time. That is the first rabbi I've ever met that was able to sum up so much in such a little time. So I'm just impressed, Kokavo. That's just insane how you were able to sum all of that up. I love that she brought up Shavuot because it's one of my favorite holidays, not only because of the food, and you have to understand that Judaism and food have a very strong connection. But really specifically because in the book of Ruth, we really start to dive into conversions, and we start to talk a lot about conversions, and it's something special to me as a person going through conversion. It really highlights the essence of for me, my neshama, my Jewish soul. And we really start to dive deeper into this. So my Jewish journey really began when I started to question a lot of things. I started to question myself, question my faith. And I remember sitting at a dinner with a couple of rabbis, and I had grown up thinking that you should never question any sort of religious text, any sort of religious conversations. You should just agree to it. And see, that didn't really sit well with me, that, the fact that we were just supposed to accept these things. So I remember I was sitting with my partner, and as any rabbi that invites you over to his house, there's going to be text study, no matter what. And we started having text study, and I looked over to my partner. I was like, don't worry, I won't ask questions. I won't be controversial. And she's like, no, 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 ask questions. They want you to ask questions. So I started asking questions. Before I knew it, I stayed an hour and a half more after people had left, just me having conversation with the rabbi, diving into deep, complex thoughts on religion, faith, action, and really looking at what it means to be faithful, what it means to have a hope. What does prayer look like to me? And from there, that really ignited my passion for Judaism. I started to see that for every single thing that I tried to ask for, there was almost an answer with a question. And that was something that was beautiful for me. Nobody gave me an exact answer. They asked me, what do you think about it? Or why don't you ask me? I've been able to have conversations with amazing rabbis like Rabbi Yitzhak Greenberg, who has just been a phenomenal inspiration into my learning, Rabbi Yanklowitz, really diving deep. And I'm glad that Rabbi Emily was able to talk about the commandment that in Judaism most is talked about 36 times actually, which is how to treat a stranger. Myself being undocumented and being an immigrant, I really, really, really held on and clinged on to this commandment, because not just, love, it goes deeper into loving and protecting the stranger. When we're looking at Leviticus, we see that commandment goes into loving a stranger. So think about not just tolerance, but far beyond tolerance is love. And that's just a beautiful thing to me. Another thing that really just keeps me going in the work of that we do here at Arizona Jews for Justice with Rabbi Shmuley is really standing up for immigrant families and standing up for migrant families, where I really see one of the best lessons that was taught. I look at a teaching from Rabbi Akiva where he was asked, what is the most important Jewish value? And everybody was thinking different things. He's going to say this, he's going to say that, but Rabbi Akiva actually said consistency. Just as you consistently bring in Shabbat, you should have consistency with everything. And again, bringing in Shabbat is a day of rest. And I really think about that, because then he further goes in to talk about how he gives an example of a drop of water consistently hitting a rock and how it's able to crack that rock, how it's able to go into that rock. A single droplet of water just continuously hitting that. And that goes to me, the application of consistency and how we're consistently advocating, how are we consistently looking at prayer, how are we consistently looking at our own faith, has been just a beautiful, beautiful lesson. So I share that lesson with y'all because I unfortunately have to leave a little bit early, and I depart with that little lesson from Rabbi Akiva. I mean, you're in amazing hands with Rabbi Emily, but think about it this way. How are you consistently bringing in your own faith? How are you consistently grounding yourself? And what can you consistently do to be able to repair this world, to be able to heal those broken vessels that we believe? How can you create change? So everybody, thank you so much. You're in great hands with Rabbi Emily and Abe, which I'm sure are going to dive into some great Torah, some great stories. It was good to see familiar faces here like Margaret, my friend Jose, and other folks that we have had the pleasure to advocate together with. Take care, everybody.
Thank you so much, Abby, for your sacred experience, for sharing this with us. And now we will hear from Abe, your experience and the work that you are doing, Abe.
Yeah, thank you, Vasu. So I was very humbled to be asked to speak today. I am not a member of the clergy, so I'm trying to bring a bit of a unique perspective. So a little background about myself. I'm a descendant of Holocaust survivors from Poland. I was they basically were from Poland. Their whole families, my mother and father's my grandparents were all murdered in Treblinka. Many aunts and uncles were killed. We did have a few people surviving. We lived in Germany after the war for 5 years, trying to gather our family together. I was born in towards the end of those 5 years and came to Canada when they immigrated to Canada as a baby. Uh, Upon living in Canada, my mother tongue was Yiddish, which is like the mother tongue, the basic language that European Jews used for since 1100 A.D. And that was my mother tongue. I walked out to the streets and I had to learn English. My parents spoke Yiddish the whole time. We were different. We were immigrants. We had just lived a nightmare, and there's a lot of that could be said about that. Maybe I'll get into that a little bit later. But that's my background. I said I grew up in Canada, lived there for 56 years. The Canadian main Jewish denomination is Orthodoxy. So I know Rabbi Langowitz talked about Orthodox, Reform, and Conservative. I personally grew up in an Orthodox one, but I wasn't Orthodox. But I could only, when I went to a synagogue, I could basically only practice in the Orthodox way, where men sit different from women. My mother was kosher, but we were not Orthodox people. But we only had, that's the approach, and that's the Judaism I learned, which is a very, very close to Roman Catholicism. It's a lot of rules, and I'm sure Rabbi Languids has gone through some of this. So that's another part of my background, and then I moved to Arizona 16 years ago. My whole family came here, and I've lived here ever since. We're all Americans now, dual citizens. So I come at it from a different perspective. Throughout my life, I have been in and out of various degrees of faith when it comes to Judaism. I've always maintained my belief in God. Just like Rabbi Langwitz said, it varied during different times of my life what that concept was. But I was always proud that Judaism was the first, monotheistic religion, and created that concept, and it was very, very important to me. As I said, I might bring a little bit unique perspective. To me, Judaism, I've heard a lot of definitions. You can't define it. One of the closest ones is from our own one of the Orthodox rabbis here that's very known, Rabbi Alush. I think some of you might have heard of him. He says it's a family. I'm just basically quoting him. It's per the generational descriptions in the Old Testament. If you actually read the Old Testament, they will go through all the names and all the generations from Abraham on, going right to David and Jesus and all that, and then we are part of that family, okay? And that Jesus was in that family for everybody, and we are a family of man. But to me, there's like a natural sensitivity and a feeling of oneness whenever I learn another person I meet is Jewish. I don't know why that happens, but it has more to do not so much with the Bible, but just through the fact that we just have experienced so much together. We have a history too much together, and that brings me to another definition I recently heard by I think a Reform rabbi. His name is David Kasher, Rabbi David Kasher, and there's a congregation, an online congregation he's a part of called IKAR, IKAR. And by the way, Margaret, I'll post it in the chat. You can go online and participate in services there too. I think they're Reform, but I'm not sure. Somewhere between Reform and Conservative. So what is a Jew? As I said, a family. But so Rabbi Kasher says it's a civilization. It really is civilization. It basically, we've existed for 3,000 years, and I don't know. It's one of the closest definitions I could say. It's just everything. It's just everything. We're part of the world. But it's not just a religion, and it's not just a family, and it's not just Torah study. As Rabbi Language said, there's many agnostic and secular Jews. We have culture. We have music. We have in Israel. There's the greatest authors and the greatest musicians, and we have politicians, and we're everything. but we're unique because we're also spread out all over the world. But we're also unique because we're very small. So that's my perspective there. What else can I say? So one of the things that I was always, okay, so let me go back to the Holocaust part of it because this affected a lot of my life. And I'm as I told you, I'm a director, membership director, and outreach director of Phoenix Holocaust Association. We do a lot of really good work. Biggest thing is to support the survivors, the Holocaust survivors, of which there's about 75. There used to be about 125 in the Phoenix area. There's another 20 in Tucson. We physically support them. We take care of them, make sure that they're doing well, and we help we support, of course, with their children, and it's through their children that we support them a lot because we're second all generation. So uh, lately, when I'm in Arizona, that's become my most identifiable thing of being a Jew. I also, as you know, I think that as Eddie and Rabbi Langowitz said, tikkun olam, the care of the world. I've always been a very socially justice person. Oh yeah, I better tell you this one. I when I was in Canada and 20 years old, I became I became very sensitive about the fact that I was a Holocaust descendant survivor and I was Jewish, and I started to believe in Zionism, and I became a leader in a Zionist organization called Hashomer Hatzair, and I actually moved to Israel and got married there. But I did come back, so I just run the gamut of everything. I'm a good person to talk to over here. So yeah, and then going back to basically the last thing, because I don't want to take that much time. Just some key things. Um, being the other thing affected I did come back, but I would always defend the right of Israel to the end, no matter what you hear out there. Um, we can go into that later. So, as far as experience of growing up with with parents who were Holocaust survivors, they were traumatized in some ways. I heard and I heard frightening stories from them around the table. Not that much, but there were books about books with photos about the thousands and hundreds of dead bodies in death camps that were lying around in their night tables that I accidentally got hold of when I was like 7, 8 years old. Things I didn't understand, but I knew there was ghosts around and there was lost relatives, and But meanwhile, my brothers and I were trying to live the Canadian great life, and it was very confusing. Um, I knew my parents were hurt. I knew they were traumatized. A lot of people like me, a lot of children like me, um, we felt a responsibility to protect our parents from the pain or further trauma. So we compensated by studying and working extra hard and living up to their expectations. We didn't ever tell them any bad news. We did bad things, and sometimes they caught us, and sometimes and it was horrible. But we were. I find that's one extra special thing we had compared to the children of non-survivors. Um, Also, we were very proud of our parents for surviving and thought that they were heroes because they were just literally. My father survived out of 2,000 people in a Russian work camp. Only 200 survived in 1941 in Siberia, and he came and he kept going. And then above all that, my mother and father also lost two children after the war tragically. One from an accident, one from illness, and I was actually both those children were named after my grandparents who had died in the Holocaust. And my grandparents were my parents were very, after the kids, those two died, I was born. And they were very, very superstitious being from Poland. But because those two kids were named after a grandfather, Eliezer, and a grandmother, Razel, um, anyways, oh no, actually one of the other grandfather was named Abraham. So they didn't. Let me go back. So Eliezer, one of my grandparents, their son who died of the accident was named Eliezer too. So they were superstitious. When I was born, they wanted to keep naming their kids after their parents. So they went to the rabbi, but it was bad luck to do it if a kid died. Okay, I'm sorry if I'm getting confusing to you. Do you get it? So so they asked the rabbi, what should we name this baby? That was me. And they named him, he said, name him Abba, which means father in Hebrew. Okay, so that became my name, Abba. And so, and not Avram and not Eliezer and not Ray, you know. So basically, you know, all these things happened to me, and I realized, you know, you just realize what you made, what your history brings you to. So yeah, I think that's really all I really want to say. You can ask me some questions, but I think you're getting the idea of, you know, what being a Jew can be. I mean, it's just, you know, but you know, the thing about the Holocaust was horrible. There have been other Holocausts and genocides to other people all over the world, and our association, you know, always stands up and speaks up against everything, and that's why I'm a socially just person and why I'm involved. So I hope I didn't divert you too much from this, but it's another whole aspect of Judaism.
Thank you so much, for sharing with us your experience of life and faith. And now we will have a time for questions and answers. And we already have questions from Jose and from Margaret. Jose, would you like to share with us your questions?
Hey, a question to Rabbi Emily. I'm curious about the approximate percentage of synagogues or temples that observe the tradition of doing study at night the day before Shabbat. Shavuot, yeah.
So I don't know an exact percentage. I would say it depends on the community, but a decent number, I would say, do observe that practice. So something to know is that Jewish holidays all begin in the evenings. They go from evening to evening. So on Saturday night, it will be the beginning of Shavuot through sundown on Sunday.
Correct.
So this is sort of the entry into the holiday. And so many people will practice by having a service and then having learning throughout the evening. Some people will do a couple hours. Some people will do, here in Phoenix, we're doing 4 hours. Some people go all through the night. So it kind of depends on where you are. And then in the morning, communities will have a service, a special festival service, and they'll read from Torah. And there's also, as part of the festival service, a service called Yizkor, which means remembrance. So this is 3 times a year at these holidays, Shavuot and Passover and Sukkot. There's also special services in memory of those who have died. So for example, I belong to Temple Chai. Temple Chai is part of the communal evening. So it's, you know, Temple Chai, Temple Solel, Temple Kolami, Congregation Or Zion, a lot of the synagogues in Phoenix are working together to create that evening study. And then in the morning, they'll have their own morning service for the holiday as well. And some synagogues will also choose this time of year to do confirmation, since it's about study and learning. So they'll have a service maybe the Friday night before, or maybe on the day of Shavuot, in honor of their confirmation students, which is usually 10th grade or maybe 12th grade, some places do. So.
Thank you. Yeah, the only reason, well, the reason I asked, because I grew up in a home, and I mentioned that in the previous comment, Christian, but Sephardic tradition. So we observe all of the Jewish holidays. And to me, Shavuot was the most important one because of having to do the little living outside and bringing, you know, the fruits and flowers and all of that. So that was the reason why I don't see the same, I don't know that I want to use the word importance, but as strong a tradition in the US as I did when I was growing up in Mexico.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, part of that is just, so a few thoughts. One is, it's a hard holiday for many people in the United States because summer break has usually already started for students. So it's often hard to get families engaged because they've just finished their school year and they're all out of town, or they're finally done, or they're hanging out with their family. And so most congregations struggle often, Passover is right in the middle of the year, everyone's doing things. So sometimes Shavuot is less known. And I would say if you didn't have an experience of the evening, study, and you have that experience of the flowers and the fruits instead, that might make sense if you have Sephardic ancestry, because the expulsion of Jews from Spain was in 1492, and the development of the evening study wasn't until the 16th century. So it's possible that if there were traditions from sort of Spanish ancestry or something like that that came down through your family, that they wouldn't have known that practice because they wouldn't have practiced that way.
Yeah, and I'm well aware of the historic, Spain expulsion, because we could trace my mother's last name to the expulsion from Barcelona.
Wow.
Thank you, though.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And Margaret, you also have some questions?
Thank you. Can Rabbi or somebody explain to me this business of Zionism within the Judaism context, if it's for us not totally ignorant people?
Is that all you want?
Sorry.
You got another hour?
Well, or could you refer me to
Well,
a good place?
Can I just say something? And because I was a very strong Zionist, Jewish people were persecuted all through the ages, but it really got, in Europe, it got really bad in the late 19th century. Do you hear me? And basically, some Jewish leaders, and notably by the name of Theodor Herzl was one of them, developed the idea that, and then developed the idea, but believed that Israel was the only place where that where Jews could go and be a people. So that's where it came from. I will let the rabbi continue, but basically, it was a refuge. There had been Jews living in Old Jerusalem all through those years, and Jews in Europe were basically agricultural. They were farmers, and they went to Israel, started to develop a desert, and that's how it started. That's where the term Zionism first started. So that's the historical background. It was a movement. It was a movement of Jews from Europe, Russia, and Ukraine mostly, starting in 1880, 1890, it was basically secular actually, and it was for nationalistic reasons and to avoid persecution and to develop their own homeland. So that's the original definition of Zionism.
Yeah, Abe summed it up beautifully. I think Zion is one of the names for the land of Israel in biblical text. So that's why they chose Zionism, in Hebrew, Zion. And as Abe said, so there were Jews living in the land of Israel from the time after the Exodus throughout history, being conquered by various peoples. They built a temple, the Babylonians came, the temple destroyed, they left, they came back, the Romans came during the time of Jesus and after. The temple's destroyed in 70 of the Common Era. And at that point, Jews are sort of sent into exile more permanently, though there are some who remain in the land of Israel. The story of the Maccabees takes place, and that's the last time that Jews have sovereignty within the land of Israel until 1948. So as Abe said, the movement of Zionism that we know today originated in the late 19th century in Europe at this time of, this belief in nationalism. And it basically just meant if you were a Zionist, you believed that the Jewish people deserved to have their own state. And there was much discussion. Should it be in the land of Israel? Or should it be somewhere else, Madagascar? Is there open land somewhere that we can use? And eventually they said, well, let's try and see if we can have it in this land that we have historical connection to. So that's the origin of it. But the longing to Israel, to the land of Israel, is present in Judaism from the time of exile to the development of the nation state. So yeah, there's so much we could say about Israel, but that's the history of it.
Thank you so much. We wonder if there is another question that you may or have. If there is no other question, we can continue with the closing remarks from Rabbi Emily. If there is something that you would like to close in this.
Sure, yeah, and I saw Margaret had a question in the chat about if you're visiting, what should you wear, where should you sit, where should you go? So I'll speak for the Reform congregations, which is my denomination where I attend. And there are 4 in the Valley and then 1 in Tempe. And I'm happy to link that in the chat too, or tell you more about it. But in those congregations, nobody's asking you at the door, have you been here before? In most congregations, nobody's really asking that. So you could just go in and sit in the back and follow along if you were curious. There's no particular visitors section. You could sit in the front if you felt confident and you wanted to. You could certainly say to someone, I'm not Jewish, I've never been before, but I want to learn more. Is it okay if could you help me understand what's going on? And hopefully someone will be friendly enough to say, of course, come sit with me. So, and people wear, it depends on where you are, but it's not super formal. I grew up in the East Coast and people were in their nicest, they were in beautiful everything. Here, you wear some, a shirt and a pair of pants and you're good to go, or you can wear a skirt and a shirt or a dress or whatever you like to wear. As long as you're not in a crop top and short shorts, you're probably fine. But we'll see people, sometimes they show up straight from hiking and they're in cargo pants and a t-shirt, and it's a little more informal here in the Southwest. Yeah, so, and most congregations will have services on Friday evenings for Shabbat. I would say check on their websites because of the pandemic. I know some places have asked people to pre-register. I don't know if that's still the case everywhere, but they're trying to keep track in case someone is sick and then they need to reach out. But yeah, you can just show on up on a Friday night and check it out. And I'll put in the chat, this is the registration for, oops, that's not it. The registration for, they are asking people to register so they know how much food to get. But this is for the Shavuot celebration, and it will be on Saturday evening, June 4th, from 7 p.m. to 12 a.m. You can leave whenever you want to leave at Temple Chai, which is 4645 East Maryland Road, Phoenix. And they have an in-person option and also a Zoom option. So if you want to just sign on Zoom, that's an option on the registration form, and they'll send you a Zoom link. So yeah, most congregations are very happy to have anyone, and you can just show up and they'll see what there is to see. If you're nervous about it or you want to find a time that you feel like, oh, I could go with someone Jewish, you can send me an email. That's my email address, and I'm also happy to answer any other questions if people have lingering questions. But yeah, I'm not always in person. Sometimes it's I watch on streaming. So I'm not always in person on a Friday night, but I can certainly make myself in person if that's something that someone wanted to go check out. And for Saturday night, same thing. I'm not quite sure yet if I'm going to be in person or if I'm going to be watching on Zoom. So feel free to join in person. I may or may not be there. I might be on Zoom, but yeah.
Yeah, so just to expand on that, many of the synagogues are are still doing a lot of it virtually, and then they're allowing like a limited number of people to go in person, between 25 and maybe 100 at the most. The Orthodox synagogues allow everyone. I don't know if you'd want to go to that, but yeah. So that's why if you look in the chat, it's just another option. I put in a link to what's called ICAR, IKAR. It's kind of a conservative slash on maybe reform online site, and you could go on there and register. They're gonna, as I say in the text, they're gonna ask you a couple of questions, but it's before they allow you to enter, because they have some security there. But it's basically very easy, I think. So you could get an idea for Shavuot too if you want to do that. So just another idea for you guys. That's it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Abe. Thank you so much, Rabbi Emily. We really appreciate for have the opportunity today to connect with your faith. We appreciate you, and we are happy to learn more about you.